Good morning or afternoon, and welcome to our webinar, Biodiversity in Our Backyard, Pathways to Protection and Renewal. My name is Maria Bremner, and I'm the Manager of Climate Action and Sustainability at Royal Roads University, and I'll be your moderator for today's conversation. And I'm so thrilled to join you and host this. It's a timely and important conversation about how we can work together to protect and support the rich biodiversity that sustains our communities everywhere, and be that forests or wetlands or shorelines or even our own backyards. We're all connected somehow. Before we begin, I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of the lands, the traditional lands of the Esquimalt and Songhees peoples, whose deep relationships to these lands and waters continue to this day. And for me, this acknowledgement is an expression of my deep gratitude to live, learn, and work in these rich ecosystems, but also to affirm my own responsibilities that come with this place. And as we reflect on biodiversity, may we do so with a larger respect, gratitude, and shared commitment to the original and current stewards of these lands and waters, and also to the beings and waters that sustain us all. We each and every one of us have a kinship to this place and to the beings around us. And wherever you're coming in from, I invite you to just briefly acknowledge, whether it's in the chat or for yourself, the lands you're on. I know we have many local folks today, but also people joining us from further abroad. This panel discussion is really part of a larger effort for us at Royal Roads, but elsewhere, to increase the understanding and engagement in biodiversity. So we really hope that you're also able to join us tomorrow for our in-person celebration at the Colwood campus. We can drop that link in the chat shortly, where we'll be having walks, talks, and exhibitors. But we also really wanted to host this conversation and dialogue with some incredible leaders that I'll introduce you to shortly. We see biodiversity as a really important living fabric. It connects us all to life. It's really what is the foundation to our region's resilience, also a foundation to our region's beauty and its ability to adapt or cope with change. And we also know that the ecosystems across the region, globally as well, are under growing threats, whether that's from habitat fragmentation, climate impacts, or the increasing urban pressures that we're seeing all around us. Today, our goal is not just to look at the challenges, though, but also explore the pathways to protection and renewal. So how, whether it's governments, researchers, communities, individuals, can work together and sustain biodiversity across the region. So before we get going, I just want to touch on a few brief housekeeping items. First, the session is being recorded. And secondly, while we're gathered here to listen to our wonderful panelists, we also really want to keep some time at the end for some questions. So as we go through the conversation, feel free to drop your comments or questions into the chat feature. And we'll provide a brief opportunity at the end to answer those. So I'd like now to just briefly introduce our wonderful panel, and just given their bios and their expertise, it will be brief. But I really encourage you to check out their work through the links that we have on the event webpage. These three folks are incredible leaders in their own spaces who bring a deep expertise and also heart to this work. Dr. Rob Newell, and Beverly, if you're okay to spotlight people as they come in, that would be wonderful, thank you. Dr. Rob Newell is a Canada Research Chair in Climate Change, Biodiversity, and Sustainability at Royal Roads University. He's a system thinking expert whose research focuses on integrated planning and policy, stakeholder engagement, and sustainable community development. Bob Peart is a biologist, educator, and award-winning conservationist who's leading work in an urban biosphere reserve proposal for our region. Bob has devoted his life to conservation and nature education, and he has worked in the fields of park management, land use planning, and environmental education. But he is also, I underline this strongly, an extremely dedicated volunteer who has contributed countless hours to many different organizations and initiatives. And some of those include Nature Canada, the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada, and he's currently with the Greater Victoria Naturehood and the Friends of Shoal Harbour Society, just to name a few. And finally, but last but not least, Sarah Primeau, who is the Executive Director of the Stewardship Centre of BC, which supports partnerships and stewardship action across communities. Sarah brings a very unique perspective to this space with over 18 years of experience as a landscape architect, integrating ecology with architecture and focusing on process-based restoration. So thank you. Welcome to each of you for making the time in your very busy schedules to join us for this important conversation. Really appreciate your time today. And so to begin with, I thought that it would be great if we could each if I could invite each of you to just take a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, to introduce your work and share how biodiversity protection shows up in what you do, and also a comment on why it matters to our region right now. And we're going to start with Bob, and I'm going to share some screen slides that you have provided, and then we'll move to Sarah and then Rob. So just bear with me as I just bring the slides up. And you're all seeing those right now?
We are.
Thumbs up. Okay, and I'm going to go back to the start. Sorry, Bob. There we go. Take it away, Bob.
Bob, you're muted, and I hope you can find the mute button.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Upon reflecting what Maria wanted us to talk about, I thought it would be useful for me to share with you a proposal for an urban biosphere region project for Greater Victoria. And in August, a year or so ago, 100 of us met, had a conversation about this, and the result of that workshop was we passed a resolution to nominate the Victoria region as a biosphere reserve, and we've requested the Capital Region District as a government to lead that conversation. Next. Next slide. This proposal is being put forward by Naturehood, Greater Victoria Naturehood, which is a project that I'm involved with. The whole idea is nature's in your hood, Naturehood. Back up, please. And so that's what the proposal's being led by. We're in formal collaboration, and we've been the group that are presently putting forward the conversation. So the next slide. The next slide is, for those of you who aren't aware, is what is a biosphere reserve. And a biosphere reserve is just a learning place. It's a research learning place for sustainable development. The main objectives are around biodiversity and reconciliation. And through that, we try to address climate. And it's organized around a core, a buffer, and a transition zone. So the next slide, please. So Biosphere Reserve is a worldwide program under UNESCO. Currently in Canada, there are 19 biosphere reserves, or 3, and non-mineral sound and house sound. And Western Reserve is designated only. Doesn't come with fun, but it comes with human. Next. Next, please.
I've got the next slide up.
Why here? Yeah, why here? Why do we think that a biosphere reserve is important? Well, the capital region, everyone knows capital is place for nature, and to keep it that way. The recognition within that. Surprisingly to a lot of people, there's already 25% legislative protection in Greater Victoria, so that'll provide the core function for our work. And there's just a really strong base of like-minded individuals, businesses, and municipalities who want to collaborate around this conversation and have it serve as an integrating mechanism for a lot of what's going on in Greater Victoria. So next. So the next steps are the CRD's process of formalizing that role. I'm going to the board in February or March. We're pretty confident it's going to be approved. And then what we'll do is we'll form a local roundtable of governance for 15 and 18 people to kind of coordinate the conversation. We're in preliminary conversations with U of Vic to serve as the university base for the research and the projects. And then groups like and the round table will assist the CRD in compiling the information that's needed. The proposal between starting and ending, it's about a 2 to 3 year consultation process before we can put the formal documents forward to UNESCO. So that was really to give you an overview of the and if you have any, please talk to me.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Bob. I think that we are having some internet connectivity issues with you. There is a little bit of a lag, but I think we've got a good understanding, at least at a preliminary level, of the Biosphere Reserve project. Thank you so much, and look forward to hearing a little bit more about it in the conversation to come. Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you now, and I'll share your slides. Take it away, Sarah.
Thanks, Maria. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate today in this great initiative. As you mentioned, Maria, I'm the Executive Director at the Stewardship Centre for British Columbia. And some people on the call may be familiar with my predecessor, DG Blair, who was in this position for a number of years. And I've been in the position for a year, starting last fall. So the Stewardship Centre has a mandate to support ecological stewardship in BC through collaborative partnerships and developing evidence-based technical, educational, and capacity building resources. And we do this through 3 program areas. The Green Shores program is one of our best known. It is a framework for nature-based solutions, which includes training, demonstration projects, and project certification. So try to look at a range of approaches to encouraging nature-based approaches to creating resilient shorelines and adapting to climate impacts along our shorelines, as well as, of course, restoring and enhancing the ecological health of our shorelines. We also have a wildlife and species at risk program, and some examples of the initiatives under that are the Green Bylaws Toolkit, which may be of interest to municipal partners who are on the call today. If they're not familiar with it, that's in its 3rd edition now. And we've collaborated in a number of initiatives in the past, such as the Naturescape BC program, which we're actually hoping to revive. So if anybody on the call is interested in partnering on that, please reach out to me. And then the last program area is strengthening stewardship, which right now is focused on our Green Space for All project, focused on creating equitable access to green space, so developing tools for local governments and others to improve equity in green space access. Next slide. Prior to my joining the Stewardship Center, I worked in private practice as a landscape architect and ecologist for a number of years. And that was at Space to Place Landscape Architects. And my role in a lot of those projects related to restoring natural processes and ecological processes in our projects, creating flood resilient or climate resilient designs. And an example of one of the projects is the Still Creek Watershed Enhancement Opportunity Study, where we looked at how could we expand the corridor for Still Creek and turn it into a really multifunctional corridor through the city to make the city more resilient, or particularly this neighborhood more resilient to climate-related flooding events, as well as yielding all kinds of co-benefits for our biodiversity, human health, connections with nature, and so on. And so that's an example of a project that we worked on across scales to achieve some of these biodiversity goals. Next slide. As a volunteer and also in my professional life, I've worked on ideas around ecologically sensitive development and neighborhood planning. And I'm currently involved as a volunteer in a local initiative where I am in Parksville that is advocating for ecological buffer zoning around protected areas and along ecological corridors to increase ecological resilience and co-benefits in urban and suburban areas. And so the diagram shows at left kind of a typical, like, generic illustration of a neighborhood with a protected park and a protected stream corridor and housing in between, and using the principles of ecologically sensitive development and ecological buffer zoning. The image on the upper right shows how those tools can be used to increase the ecological integrity of protected areas and increase the ecological connectivity between protected areas. Versus the bottom graphic, which shows sort of more of a conventional pattern of development that a lot of municipalities are facing with high development pressures that just increase the density of housing without regard to those ecological connection and ecological kind of the importance of the matrix surrounding those protected areas. And on the right are some of the design principles that we're talking about in our neighborhood initiative that can be used to increase the ecological health in neighborhood planning. Next slide. So this relates to what Bob was talking about in terms of the biosphere approach. I live in the Mount Arrowsmith biosphere region, and this graphic shows the parks and protected areas within the region that currently don't have buffer zoning around them. But if you go to the next slide, this shows the idea that applying this lens of ecological buffer zoning can help to increase the integrity of the parks and protected areas by implementing various principles related to ecologically sensitive design. So those are some examples of the work that I have done related to this theme of biodiversity in our backyard, and look forward to discussing these and fielding questions later on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. Very interesting. Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you to just give an overview from your perspective. What are you up to?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to build a little bit on what Bob and Sarah are talking about, to speak a little bit about how you engage people in these types of initiatives. Biosphere reserves, trying to create buffers, ecological buffers, and develop green space that could support habitat and quality of life. My research has going back to my research title, I'm the Canada Research Chair in Climate Change, Biodiversity, and Sustainability, which is a very broad umbrella of topics, but my specific research focuses on integrated planning. So this is a way of looking at not just how to do biodiversity conservation and habitat protection, but do it in a way that you understand how these sort of strategies and approaches link to a whole variety of social, environmental, and economic perspectives. So what this means is I work with a lot of community members, local governments, and NGOs to identify, some of these the challenges they might be experiencing in terms of local sustainability and well-being, and then also the types of values, the things that they want to preserve and make sure that they can enhance and carry on from generation to generation, and then finally the types of strategies they might want to look at to address the challenges and preserve and enhance those values. With that, we create a lot of things like systems maps, systems models, and think in kind of complex terms about, if we're to take one strategy or do one strategy, what would it mean with a variety of different social, environmental, and economic outcomes? Now, this is all complex information. So the question is then, how do you involve a whole diversity of different community members, the different people into these types of initiatives, get them to understand these sort of systems, relationships, and interactions? Well, with that, what I do is I experiment with a lot of different tools for effectively engaging stakeholders and community members in these types of strategies and in this type of thinking. And one of these types of tools are these realistic visualizations that you see right here. This is an example of one that we did that was here to try and support what we developed to try and support watershed management and planning in the Millstream Creek watershed. And this particular site that you're looking at is a development site for a new Langford Business Park. And when we chatted with a bunch of folks that are working in the watershed and are concerned about its health, this is a site that came up. They were concerned about what this development might do in terms of the health of the creek and the ecosystems that it supports. So through conversations, we decided to, we created a visualization of a scenario that could address some of these challenges. And as you can see on the right, this is a visualization of the scenario where people could walk through, look at the different components, talk about the things they like about it, dislike, get a really sense of like the on the ground feel of what this scenario in reality might be like if implemented in the real world. And what I want to stress about this is that the scenario itself will show a lot of things like creating healthy and substantial buffers around the creek to protect the creek from things like erosion and pollutants introducing and rolling into the creek through runoff, surface runoffs. But it will also contain things like trails and features for people to enjoy recreation in that buffer area. So what you're looking at is not just a strategy for ecological restoration, biodiversity conservation, but also something that really kind of ties in with local well-being, recreation, quality of life, and that sort of thing. And these visualization tools kind of give you a sense of how these strategies may or may not do that sort of thing. So I'll leave it at that and looking forward to the conversation here.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Such a rich, diverse set of perspectives. I loved how we went from galvanizing interest and care and intention around this larger strategy to some concrete tactics and ways that things can be embedded within planning, to Rob, your piece around using visualizations and systems thinking to engage people in creative ways. I'd like to kick off the conversation around looking at some of the barriers and challenges for biodiversity in our region. We talk at a high level about whether it's urban threats, climate change, et cetera, governance challenges. But I'm wondering if from each of your perspectives, if you could share what are some of the biggest challenges or drivers to biodiversity loss in our region that you see happening? And maybe, Rob, why don't I start with you since you went last with the presentation there.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So when I teach this issue of biodiversity loss in my classes, I'll often use the extinction HIPPO, which is a useful acronym to figure out what the big pressures on biodiversity are. So going through the letters, the H stands for habitat loss, I is invasive species, P for pollutants, Another P for population growth, which is kind of a contributing or enhancing factor such as some of these other issues. And then the O is a sort of catch-all for over-harvesting, overconsumption, and that sort of thing. In the extinction hippo, it is important to recognize that H, the habitat loss, is really high up there. It's one of the big drivers of biodiversity loss. And we see that in the Capital Regional District, particularly where I'm based and where I live, where Rural Roads is found in the West Shore area. So we're seeing a lot of rapid development. And this is kind of one of the drivers, or one of the impetuses behind that Millstream Creek Watershed Project, looking at in this development, is there a way that we can address some of these particular issues around habitat loss, habitat degradation? Now, I also want to note that although it's not explicitly in the extinction hippo, one of the other real impetuses for doing this this Millstream Creek project was noticing that we're having this habitat loss, but at the same time too, we're experiencing the effects of climate change, right? And the C is not in the hippo itself, but it's certainly something that can intensify a lot of those issues in there. So thinking in terms of increases in extreme precipitation events, when then you're actually seeing a lot of erosion, sediment, and runoff coming into these aquatic fresh system habitats, right? And this is sparked a lot of concern, not just in researchers around here, but a lot of the local stewardship groups. So yeah, there's this challenge that we've experienced in British Columbia, and it's something that people talk about a lot in the Victoria area, that we're having challenges in terms of finding housing, affordable housing, just available housing, right? And I think that kind of sets people into a bit of a panic mode and say, let's start developing. Let's develop fast. Let's develop a lot, right? And that development, if it's not done in a proper way, then yeah, you're going to start seeing things like these pressures on ecosystems, habitat degradation. And, to Sarah's earlier point, you see a lot of not just habitat degradation, but a lot of habitat fragmentation too. So, you can have like a really large, wonderful patch of habitat that allows creatures to move through, wildlife to move through, and then you can split it up and then really kind of cause challenges for a lot of local wildlife. And that is the thing that we're seeing quite a bit here.
Absolutely. And I think that touches on some of the pieces that Sarah even brought up in her introduction. Sarah, why don't I just turn it over to you to provide some comment?
Thank you. Echoing what Rob said, I think the housing piece is really at the forefront of a lot of people's minds these days, and there's a lot of provincial and federal mandates to increase housing, but those kind of mandates in that direction is not being they're not pairing that delivery with tools for municipalities to also achieve their other ambitions around protecting and expanding tree canopy and ecological health, climate resiliency through natural assets, that kind of thing. And so there's this, this sort of false dichotomy that a lot of development is either, that it's ecology or, environment, or, we have to balance environment with development. And that fails to recognize that, ecological health underpins the economic viability and human health. And so really we need to put ecological health and planning for ecological health at the forefront, and use that as a framework to guide where this development should happen and how this development should happen, so that we are also, we're not just developing for the sake of, at the expense of the ecological and human health, because we're going to create these really dense cities, and then they're not going to be nice places to live because they will lack, those the co-benefits that come with having healthy ecosystems in our cities. So I think it's the attitude about environment versus development versus, having both, pairing both, and just that default to development over conservation. That's a very kind of short-term, short-sighted approach to development.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see governments, municipalities, national level falling into that trap of one or the other. And this is definitely exacerbating as we're seeing more elements of the polycrisis surround us. In addition to that affordability crisis, we have climate change layering on these issues. So these maladaptions that you speak of become more pressing and dire. Bob, I'm wondering if you have anything that you'd like to add in terms of some of the challenges or pressures that you're seeing to biodiversity loss in our region. Oh, you're muted there, Bob.
Sorry if my internet connection's weird today. I don't understand that. But anyway, what I'd say is that the solution to the science is clear. We've known 10, 20 years exactly what to do for protecting biodiversity and climate. There was a study done in British Columbia taking nature's pulse in the mid-90s. I mean, it's really clear. And so there isn't enforcement of current laws. There's a lot of delay and deny by businesses and governments, and just a lot of inaction. And so some of that comes from the fact, I guess, that the public aren't pressuring governments to move forward as they should. But governments also are really to blame. I don't like it when people say, well, the public should do this and that. Governments need to take a lot of the blame here. We know what the solutions are. We know what the science is, and there's government inaction at all levels. The other thing I'd say is that my experience is the word balance. You search for balance, nature loses every time. And so, building on what Sarah was saying, balance doesn't work. And you end up with a kind of an either or kind of thing where it needs to be both and. And so that's kind of what my perspective is.
Well, that's a perfect segue actually to the direction that I'd like to turn next, Bob. You talk about government inaction. I'd like to focus right now perhaps on that leadership piece from the regional and municipal levels. Like we know that whether it's local nations or governments at all levels, there's a crucial role that they play in biodiversity protection. And some of these things that you talk about, Sarah, the establishment of protected or buffer areas, the land use planning, all those are contributing pieces. But from your perspective, that leadership and collaboration to address biodiversity loss, it is so important. So I'm wondering if there's any examples that we're seeing either in place right now in the region or things that on the horizon could make a big difference. And maybe related to that, how can we think about integrated planning in a more systemic way? Anybody want to take this one first?
I'd take a jump at it. There is some integration taking place. You think of our drinking water. I mean, perfect example of integration and collaboration. We've got some of the best drinking water, I don't know, in North America, who knows? But we've got an excellent source of drinking water. There is coordination around, some sewage. There is coordination with within the CRD. Some aspects of it are working very, very well, and sometimes I think we kind of forget that that's happening. But where the lack of collaboration is more around nature and the environment, and nature doesn't recognize boundaries. So here on the Saanich Peninsula, for example, there are 3 municipalities: Sydney, Central Saanich, and North Saanich. And you'd think they were 3 different worlds for the peninsula and a population of 25,000 people. And so there are a lot of conversations here on the peninsula about trying to get the municipalities to collaborate more on such serious matters as tree canopy, connectivity, watershed management, that type of thing. And the conversation is slowly shifting. And I think that the municipalities are beginning to understand that they need to approach management more at a nature-based kind of function. And to be truly nature-based, you need to collaborate.
Sarah, you want to jump in there?
Sure, I can jump in. I would say, yeah, I think the examples that I know of on Vancouver Island or the Lower Mainland in particular, the ones that seem to have the most success are the ones that are founded on collaboration. There are things like these collaborative boards like Cowichan Watershed Board that I've heard a lot of great things about it, not involved with it personally. Or a lot of our project work happens through advisory committees that involve all the different perspectives that are needed to bring to the table. And I think really like trying to find that shared, like common ground and shared vision amongst diverse interests is really fundamental to coming up with successful outcomes. And so any of the examples that I've heard of that involve a collaborative approach, kind of multi-sectoral, multi-jurisdictional approaches are the ones that seem to be the most successful because of these points that you made, Bob, about nature, doesn't follow those boundaries. Watershed boundaries are, always different than municipal boundaries and so on. And so that approach is really important. And some of the specific examples, like I know City of Surrey Biodiversity Conservation Strategy is a good example where they've, are using a green infrastructure network as a foundation of development patterns. And so initiatives like that and the biosphere regions that are already in place, those are some good examples where there are successes because of the collaboration approach and the ecological kind of systems thinking behind them.
Yeah, I wonder around that's often seems quite often that it's the impetus of the individuals who are perhaps already in relation to each other, that the system itself perhaps doesn't lend incentives or allowances for that collaboration, that it's often in spite of the systems that the collaboration emerges. Rob, I'm sure you've got some thoughts and ideas on this for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I have 3 points that I'm going to make, and I think we'll start with the local government level. So one of the things that we do at least have working for us in our area of the world in BC and other places across Canada is that we, a while ago we had this thing called the gas tax agreement, right? And the gas tax agreement incentivized the creation of these things called integrated community sustainability plans. With the support for creating those, after communities that did develop them, they were eligible to receive access to different funding for different projects. But the trick with these things is that they, like as the title suggested, they are there to try and integrate a lot of different sustainability priorities. So this includes things in the human and ecological dimensions. Communities and municipalities that were effective in putting this forward and making it so that it could actually guide on the ground action were ones that were able to take those ICSPs, the Integrated Community Sustainability Plans, and adopt them, or at least at the very least take elements of them into their official community plans. So then those things become these hopefully these driving forces to be able to approach some of these issues in integrated ways. Now, planning documents can be kind of vague, and so you can interpret them in different ways and a lot of wiggle room in there, right? So that could be one challenge of them. It's great that they're there to be able to guide some of that thinking and some of that planning, but that is one challenge. The other challenge is something that we've talked about here is that, administrative jurisdictions that work at the municipal level don't really overlap with ecosystems. That would be things that you'd see at the watershed level, right? And places in Ontario, they have like conservation authorities that actually work at those sort of scales. We don't really have that here, though, and that's kind of makes things a bit problematic. What we do, though, have, particularly in the Capital Regional District, is like a lot of great passionate groups that form around creeks and watersheds. And these folks can be driving forces for connecting with other groups and creating watershed management plans. So even though you don't necessarily have a very strong governance body that's working at those watershed levels, you definitely have like at least at the very least, you have a kind of a community desire to be able to connect and create some of those actions. And if there are, like I say, there's like a lot of these groups. There's a lot of friends of this creek, friends of this watershed. You'll see a lot of them, and it doesn't take very long to kind of look up your local one if you're interested in being involved. And if I'm gonna kind of the last point I was gonna make is, a lot of these groups are involved in really good work that actually do involve or result in these heartening outcomes. So, if you ever get really kind of jaded and think that nothing is really working out there, there are some really great examples in the Capital Regional District of creeks such as Colquist Creek and River System, and tributaries of it like Gabo Creek that are starting to see salmon coming back up after restoration efforts. And, salmon are great, but salmon are also super ecologically and culturally important creatures that form keys for the larger ecosystem. So there are these examples that are happening there. So I know that I'm kind of covering a lot of points there, but I'm just trying to kind of give that like municipal perspective to the regional perspective to what's actually happening on the ground. And, hopefully, in summary, that sort of captures the overarching theme that I'm expressing here.
Well, what I love about your last comment there, Rob, is it did make me think about just that fundamental and integral connection that neighborhood level care or place-based approaches has to engaging citizens in then what does advocacy or communication or collaboration mean with their local government or decision-making bodies? And it's a good segue to sort of our last theme that I'd like to bring in around community and stewardship pathways. Because beyond government and planning in that space, it can seem very foreign to people. Community involvement can be so vital. So my next question is, and my last, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for some questions. But given all the different priorities being faced by various different levels of government, how do we keep biodiversity protection on the radar? We've talked about those different competing priorities, and it can be difficult to maintain that energy and passion to keep it so that it's not a either or, like you spoke about earlier, Sarah. So how do we keep it on the radar? And related to that, how can we get individuals and organizations involved? Anybody want to go first on this one?
I can volunteer. I think that there's a few things that come to mind. One is, really recognizing like that people are motivated by different reasons, to get involved. And often the people who are campaigning for biodiversity conservation, just inherently recognize and believe the value of nature and biodiversity. But that's not the case for everyone. Other people are motivated more by the human-centric benefits, and others are motivated more by the natural assets and the value to the return on investment at a municipal planning level and things like that. And so approaching it from all different angles is important to cast a wide net. But I do think for a lot of people, the co-benefits of urban nature do resonate. Biodiversity is kind of an abstract term for a lot of people. And so talking about the benefits of being in nature, the mental health benefits, the physical health, just the urban cooling benefits during an urban heat dome event, and the just like the joy and the biophilic kind of experiences that a lot of people experience in cities and don't necessarily have a way to like campaign for that, because it sounds kind of wishy-washy, but there's so many co-benefits that come from protecting natural areas and natural systems in the city and all the cultural values that come from them. So I think really promoting those can help to get more people on board, and grounding those ideas in place. I think, like you mentioned, Maria, is really important. So that local place-based advocacy is really valuable. So people have that connection to nature in their daily lives, and then they understand the value of nature beyond the boundaries of the city, and they maybe have more inspiration to campaign for the protection of natural areas outside of the city, just by having that positive association in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I'd be happy to build on that too, because I mean these are great points, and I think to answer the question, there's kind of two ways of looking at it. There's one, just the engagement of community members and public in the idea of biodiversity, and then there's the second one is kind of helping local governments and governing bodies about how to actually address the issue as a planning issue, right? So with this first one, just kind of speaking a bit to Sarah's points about, do a lot of folks really care about biodiversity, particularly as like other pressures come into their life, where people are feeling very economically strapped and, experiencing pressures in those ways. So do they necessarily, care about it, so to speak? Well, part of the challenge with that is that, I was involved in a lot of E&GOs before getting in academia, and talking to a lot of my old colleagues about this, biodiversity was presented in maybe not the best sort of way. It was often used, charismatic animals were kind of the flagship of it, and I've talked to people about this before, saying like, yeah, I mean, sure, I care about polar bears up north because they're great and they're kind of fun, but I mean, if they all do die, will this actually really affect my life? So what biodiversity is, that message was not conveyed properly to people like those, right? When you talk a little bit more about Sarah's point, where like what really biodiversity conservation means is really kind of like healthy ecosystems equal healthy human systems as well. We're kind of inseparable. Look at through that social ecological perspective. So taking a look at that visualization that I showed earlier, when you're kind of looking at putting a substantial riparian buffer, substantial green space next to the river, that's great in terms of protecting the river and aquatic ecosystems. You allow for native vegetation there, which is good for habitat. If you do it right along the river, then you have good connectivity. But it also is a really wonderful space, like Sarah was mentioning, for addressing things like urban heat. It's a place where people can enjoy recreation. It's a place where it actually makes that area worth living in. Like it enhances quality of life to the point where it's really kind of supporting livability and well-being. So then you're coming up with this new conversation that ecosystems are really not just a thing that are nice to have, it's a thing that are essential for our day-to-day living and well-being. And that riparian buffers, those sort of things are just one example of many. I mean, you can bring up like coastal restoration approaches, massive green space tracts that are very important to people. Also restoration or regeneration of ecosystems for food production. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, right? So that integrated perspective becomes quite important. The second point that I'm going to I'll make this one quite briefly, is helping local governments and governing agencies. Oh, sorry, my light just turned off here. I'll get it on in a second. Helping local governments and governing agencies trying to figure out how to address this issue. And I get this question a lot from a lot of the local government collaborators I work with, like, what are really good biodiversity metrics that we're working at? We're really kind of in this new space and new area around trying to figure out how to address that. And, what I'll often respond to them is landscape connectivity and ecological connectivity. So landscape connectivity for that structure to allow ecosystem connectivity. These are really, really important things to think about. And a lot of local governments are having sort of challenges trying to wrap their heads around it. Edmonton is one of the kind of the few municipalities I know that's actually created some planning around it, and is still trying to kind of figure out how to do this properly. But yeah, I do a little bit of been working on a bit of research with some of my students, trying to identify those opportunities for restoring connectivity, and probably even more importantly, identify those areas that should not be developed or should not be highly disrupted to maintain that connectivity. So I'll leave it at that. And then Bob, over to you, I guess. Sorry, Maria, I don't mean to take your job there.
Yeah, I'll just two or three things popped in my mind while the two of you were talking. Is I think at the individual level, I think it's really, I always tell people, just pick a project, have a passion, pick something local, get out and do it. And just rather than sitting at home, the other thing is we need to know what common interests are rather than what the positions are, that kind of conversation. And the big common interest is health. And it's ecological health, but ecological health and human health are so connected. health, spiritual. I think we need to talk about that more and more and more. That connection is fundamental. I also tell people, or an uncle or a grandfather or mother or whatever, take them outside and spend as much time as you can in the out of doors with the younger generation, and share your love for nature with them, whether they're 2 years old or 18 years old. We've got to get the younger generation outside and really getting a fundamental understanding of nature. Nature's in your hood. Get people outside. And the only other comment I'd make is, someone told me one time that the environment is the top back of the mind issue. It's the top back of the mind issue. Everyone kind of inherently knows nature and environment's really, really important, but seldom does it come forward. And I think these things that we've been talking about today are really, really helpful in bringing environment from being a top of the mind issue to the front of the mind issue at the individual level. And I think that's critical. But governments have got to start to deliver. It isn't up to the individual. There are thousands of volunteers doing absolutely wonderful work, but governments need to start to deliver.
There's some excellent tools available, as Sarah was sharing, and Rob as well. So thank you all for those wonderful comments and wisdom. I do want to allow some time for questions. I haven't been watching the chat too closely, but I haven't seen anything come in. Now would be a time to either drop your question into the chat for any of our panelists or all of them, or feel free, conversely, to unmute yourself and ask your questions directly. Does anybody have any questions today?
Just getting kudos. Oh, Karen, would you like to unmute yourself?
So many good points were raised. I really agree with Bob that governments need to do more. And it seems, I'm not sure what the mechanism is to advocate for that action, but I'm wondering if, Rob, you mentioned Edmonton being a very forward-thinking municipality. Can you maybe say a bit about what you think inspired that progress?
I mean, it's a good question. I know that just Edmonton, as a municipality or local government, has actually been, quite progressive in a lot of sense. So it's not just in the area of biodiversity conservation, but also climate action. Now, although this is not necessarily a direct driver of it, what I do know is that Edmonton has been involved in some of the projects that I've worked with that have involved Royal Roads and what is now the Toronto Metropolitan University, that kind of explores landscape connectivity challenges and approaches to integrated landscape connectivity in Canada across the way. So this would be kind of, I'd say, like this would be one element of the broader puzzle, but this interest and keenness to work across sectors and develop some of these government academic partnerships can be very useful for being able to continue propelling, at the very least, some enthusiasm in research. So, or enthusiasm in making progress towards some of these sort of sustainability objectives. So, I mean, that would be kind of one response that I'd have there. And I'd say, for a lot of researchers that would like to make an actual difference in the world, I would also mention that it's worthwhile to try applied research that goes transdisciplinary and breaks a lot of these sort of academic, real practitioner silos, and actually engage folks to create this sort of enthusiasm and also ways forward for some of these particular strategies and approaches. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I don't know if that fully describes it. It's also, I'd say, like, maybe end off on a point that I've just met a number of people that work at the city of Edmonton, and like I say, like, the staff there are very progressive and forward thinking, and I think there's just something to be said about having that institutional culture and organizational culture is maybe the right word for it. So if you have that, then you can kind of feel inspired to be able to move a little bit forward on some of the ideas and passions that you have.
Thank you, Rob. And I noticed that Lindsay dropped into the chat as well a few opportunities for people to get involved in local initiatives. Back to Bob's point of just picking a project and getting out and doing it. Really great starting points if you're looking for a way to get locally involved. We have time for one maybe question. Oh, sorry, Bob, I'm just seeing the other example is municipal level is Saskatoon. Did you want to expand on that, Bob, or speak to it?
Well, yeah, the Newell Valley Authority does everything that we're talking about and has been in functioning since mid '80s. They set a 100-year vision for the city of Saskatoon, and they've delivered at the cultural education level. And so I often refer people to the Newell Valley Authority as an example of how it can be done well.
Great.
I have a question for our panelists. Thank you for your work. And I know it sometimes can be challenging to keep going. If you had to sum up in a sentence or a few words, what keeps you going on the hard days, could you give us that as a bit of a closing today? Sarah, why don't you start us off?
Sure. I would say yeah, at the end of the day, it's the joy that I personally experience when I'm in nature and I have those connections to nature, and I see, I share it with my son and people around me, and I think that, yeah, just being in touch with nature and having those opportunities just in our daily lives is so important. It's so enriching.
Great, thank you. Bob, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, well, I've been in the sewer 2 or 3 times in my life. I mean, it's a pretty sad story when you talk about biodiversity. As a bird watcher, there's 60 to 70% less birds when I started to bird in the late 60s, early 70s. We haven't lost a lot of species, but the numbers are crashing. And when I look at my lifetime of work, and the environment's in much worse shape than it was when I started my work. So you kind of say to yourself, what the hell's going on here? And so that's taken me down a few times. But really, what pulls me up and what gives me energy is what Sarah was just saying. I spend as much time in the outdoors as I possibly can. I'm consciously not on social media, and I think that's been very, very important. And the other thing I get my energy from is the volunteers. You just look around you. Look at whether your issue is socioeconomic nature. The people in the community are getting energy. I mean, that's so heartening.
Rob, any closing thoughts there?
Yeah, sure. Maybe just a note to all the researchers and emerging researchers out there. I mean, the thing that really kind of keeps me excited in this work is the fact that I do actually get to work with people that operate in the real world, so to speak, right? So I do research that is meant to engage communities, at the NGOs and local governments that are really quite interested and passionate about addressing a lot of these environmental issues, right? So things that have to do with biodiversity loss, climate change, but also in terms of how they affect humanity and the quality of life. So I do see that. I see that interest, the passion, the desire to work with researchers to kind of come up with new and innovative methods to address some of these issues, and that keeps me going and keeps me excited. Speaking maybe a bit to Bob's point about the trends that happen in the world. Globally around environmental challenges, such as, when you're looking at the trends around biodiversity loss and climate change, it could get you down. But, if you work at different scales, like I often work at the local level, you can often end up seeing like you're really interested, innovative things that communities are trying to do to become more resilient to what they see is happening all around them. And those sort of things, those sort of pockets can kind of keep you going and realize that, hey, it's not all or nothing. Things happen at a lot of different scales, and we can work at the scales that we think that we can affect change at.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, thank you all. Those are very powerful reflections to end on, and hopefully some inspiring hope as well, just to keep us going. I think for me, it's relationships. And that goes back to biodiversity. No one thing is in isolation. So really to remind ourselves that we are in relation always. Really want to offer my huge gratitude to all of you for sharing your perspectives, and to all of you who joined us in the call. I hope this conversation inspires each of you, and for us to continue collaborating and care for the living systems in our very own backyards. And yes, please all, as you're able, please come to our biodiversity celebration at Royal Roads campus from 1 to 4 p.m. tomorrow. We hope to see you there, along with some really interesting exhibitors and nonprofits who are doing great work in the region, along with some great outdoor tours. Thanks, everybody.